Welcome back. This afternoon, you're listening to the Todd Laborowitz Show, Real Estate Radio and Salem Broadcast Network, WRC 1260 AM. I am your host, Todd Laborowitz, and we are speaking with Paul Molloy, CEO of Oxford House. Welcome.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Well, it's you've created an amazing structure for the drug and alcohol addiction recovery.
Well, I'm a very, very lucky individual. My wife and I were married the first time in undergraduate school at the University of Vermont.
And this is Jane.
Jane, in 1960. And then we were divorced for 13 years, and we've been remarried for 28 years. And the reason for the divorce, and the reason that Oxford House got started, is that I'm a recovering drunk. And I became a very bad drunk. My wife got sick of me trying to kill her, threw me out. I eventually got into treatment and then got into a halfway house in Montgomery County, Maryland in 1975. The house was located right where Discovery is now. And the county was going through some tough economic times, decided to close the halfway house. And the 13 of us living there took it over to operate ourselves.
Now, but you don't just take over a house. You have a very strong background.
Well, I had been Republican counsel of the Senate Commerce Committee. There was a couple of other lawyers who were in that halfway house. And there were a lot of other individuals.
So you knew the law, well-connected, and you...
We had chutzpah.
Okay.
and self-confidence. And we also had support from people in the recovery community. And the folks in the recovery community loaned us $700 to rent the building to begin the first house. And a fellow who had been in AA a long time from up in the state of Vermont came down and spent 3 or 4 days with us to help us structure it so that it could be democratically run and we could have a chance of success. And we did succeed.
And what year was this?
1975.
And today you have how many Oxford houses?
There are now 1,767 houses across the United States, 45 different states.
And how many people do you affect per year?
33,000 lived in Oxford House last year, and all but 16% of them stayed clean and sober, which is unheard of in this field.
That's amazing. Now, you also have 5 kids.
I do.
And
none of them are drunks or druggies. They all learned from watching their dad.
Got it. And in summer 2001, I see that Harvard University Kennedy School for Public Affairs seminar on drug addiction. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, Oxford House became well known after a fellow from the National Institute on Drug Abuse studied Oxford House in 1987, and he tracked down 1,300 people who'd lived in the first few houses, came to us and said, 80% stayed clean and sober. That's a very high percentage. Normally, you're lucky if 20% stay clean and sober. Word of that spread, and in 1988, a congressman called me and said, can we put some money in the Anti-Drug Abuse Act to encourage other states to create these houses? I went to the board, which was then the president of these 13 houses in the D.C. area, and they said, Paul, you're going to screw it up. Keep government out. You're going to mess everything up. So I called up Ed Madigan, who was a congressman, and said, I've created a bunch of Blackberry Goldwaters. They don't want anything to do with government. He then told the story to Ronald Reagan, whose comment was, golly gee, does Nancy know about this? And the next thing we knew, a guy from the White House was visiting that house on Northampton Street and asked them, when did you have your last vacancy? This was August of 88. They said, we had a vacancy in March. He said, how many people applied? They said 23, 24. And he said, well, I thought when you filled a house, 4 or 5 of you'd go rent another house. They said, yeah, but it takes us 2.5 years to save $5,000, which is what we need to rent a house in this neighborhood. He said, what if there was a loan fund? And they said, well, as long as it's a loan fund and we pay it back and there's no strings attached, we'll do it. And so in that Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 88, every state had to set up a revolving loan fund that would loan $4,000 to groups of 6 or more recovering people who wanted to start an Oxford House.
Fascinating.
That was the catalyst.
Wow. I'm just amazed by the whole entire transformation of taking something that has blown up, and you're pretty much self-sufficient.
We are self-sufficient, although some states, like Virginia, for example, gives us a grant of about $300,000 a year to send outreach people who are folks who have lived in Oxford House throughout the state of Virginia to rent houses, find landlords willing to rent a house, and then we teach the people how to start an Oxford House. So Virginia's got 109 houses.
Wow. Well, by the way, if you're just tuning in, I have with me Paul Molloy, CEO of Oxford House. I am your host, Todd Laborowitz, and you're listening to Salem Broadcast Network, WRC 1260 AM. Well, Paul, this is a conversation rolling into those investors out there. I've heard about investors that will buy a house in an area that they know is going to have a big supermarket coming in 5 or 10 years, and if it hits, they do Section 32, and then when it hits, they remodel the house and sell it for 2-3 times the amount. The Oxford House, you guys are looking for more houses, so the way it works is someone goes in as an investor and buys a house in the right community, and then they sign a deal with the group. And they have guaranteed rent for XYZ decades.
For years. We are looking for friendly landlords everywhere. When our outreach people go out into a community, they'll go to AA and NA meetings. The first thing they ask is, anybody in the real estate business? Fortunately, there's a lot of folks in AA who are in the real estate business. And so we say, have you got some houses to rent? Give you an example. A woman in North Carolina was opening houses for us about 1990. She went all throughout the city of Raleigh one day, couldn't find a house for rent, found a lot that were for sale. She ran into a fellow whose son had gotten clean and sober in Oxford House 2 months before. He said, how's it going, Kathleen? She says, terrible. I've looked at 10 houses today. They're all for sale. I couldn't find anybody who would rent to us. He went home, called her up, and said, my wife and I have saved $30,000. If we bought a house for you, would that be helpful? She said, oh, it's a godsend. That guy did, and today he and his wife own 12 houses across the state of North Carolina, all of them rented as Oxford houses.
So they strategically placed a plan to get a mortgage,
yes,
use their money as a down payment, and they have a guaranteed startup loan. Probably making sure it's in the right zone, because you can't have too many people in one house in some areas.
Well, except you can. Under the Federal Fair Housing Act, when it was amended in 1988, it said nobody can discriminate against the handicap. We interpreted that to mean that recovering alcoholics and drug addicts could live together as long as they were in recovery, just like a family, because they needed to do that to overcome their handicap. Some people disagreed with us. At one point, we were in federal court in 14 different jurisdictions. And in 1995, the U.S. Supreme Court heard the case, the City of Edmonds, Washington versus Oxford House, Inc., and the Supreme Court agreed with us.
Wonderful. So you've taken this all around.
We have.
Don't mess with Paul.
Well, that's what we assure a landlord, that we will take care of all of the legal problems. And at the same time, we give them this system of operation which works year after year after year. They don't have to worry about chasing a new tenant for the property.
Perfect.
We're there.
Well, what I'd like to offer you, our listeners, is an opportunity to inquire about maybe becoming an investor for a property and possibly linking with Paul Molloy and turning it into an Oxford House. And if you're interested, Topaz Mortgage, we could try to run a scenario, see what we can do, and set you up with some agents and kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together if you're looking to get a rental property and turn it into like an annuity later.
Todd, we're always looking for new rental property, and let me suggest that people go to our website, www.oxfordhouse.org, and there's all kinds of information there.
Perfect. What's that website again?
www.oxfordhouse.org.
Perfect. Now, let's get into the other side of the money. So you have the investors buy the house. You guarantee to have it filled because you have people coming in. You have this line of credit that can kind of fill in the gap. But where does the money actually come from?
Everybody in the house gets a job, and it's pretty easy to get a minimum wage job. And you don't need...
But it's hard to live with the expenses of a minimum wage job.
Not if you have 8 people in the house.
Ah.
The average number of people who live in an Oxford house is 8.2. The smallest house is 6. The largest house we have is 16. We try to encourage 2 people per bedroom because you want to fight loneliness and self-pity if you're trying to get clean and sober. And what we find is that every house is a mixture of has-beens and never-weres. I was a has-been, the fancy lawyer from Capitol Hill. There are a lot of never-weres, the guys that drop out of school in the 3rd grade. Those mixed together become a great network. And when you think about it, rich people usually get jobs for their kids because they know somebody else, and they spread the word, they network. Within these Oxford houses, great networks are formed. And so if you don't have a job and you apply in an Oxford house, you're likely to get a job within 24 hours.
Perfect. Well, Paul Molloy, CEO of Oxford House, I really appreciate you being here, and such a wonderful creation that you made with you and your friends back in the day. And thank you for making a difference in the world. Well, coming up next, we're going to have Jim Musgrave from Research Financial Strategies doing an interview on me. So you guys can learn a little bit more of my background and who I am with Topaz Mortgage and my passions and loves. I will be right back after these messages.
Investors endured 2 devastating bear market corrections since the year 2000. Unfortunately, many people still haven't recovered from their losses. Yet our clients tell a different story. I'm Jim Musgrave with Research Financial Strategies. For investments that make money in both bull and bear markets, call me at 301-588-0514 or visit jimmusgrave.com to learn how Research Financial Strategies can benefit you, your family, and your business. Can you afford not to?